Hello, everyone. Welcome to the St. Louis Art Museum's Art Speaks program. My name is Jessica Kennedy, and I'm the educator for adult learning at the museum. Before we begin, please familiarize yourself with the Q&A section located on your screen. Feel free to enter your questions at any time during the program, and we will choose a few to answer at the end. Also, there is live auto transcription available for this program. Please click the CC icon to activate or deactivate the subtitles. For today's talk, Language, Brand, Adornment, Tribute, Ascension, and Pose in the Culture, we are joined by two of the exhibition's curators, Hannah Clem, former SLAM curator and current curator of modern and contemporary art at the Blanton Museum of Art, and Andrea Purnell, audience development manager at SLAM. Thanks so much for being here today, Hannah and Andrea.
Hi, thanks for
Hi.
having us.
Hi, everybody. We're excited to be here. So we're just going to jump into it since we don't have that long. And this is a show that has a lot to talk about. So we're really excited to really give you all a walkthrough of the thematic sections of the exhibition, the culture, hip hop, and contemporary art in the 21st century. But first, we're just going to give a very brief, big overview of the show to help situate these sections. So the exhibition was really a collaborative endeavor that came out of a joint curatorial team across the Baltimore Museum of Art and St. Louis Museum of Art that included Asma Naeem, Gamian Guillot, Ricky Bird, Carlin Thomas, and Andrea and myself. So it was a polyphonic approach to curating, and we will be doing another Art Speaks if that sparks your interest in a few weeks that Jessica will plug at the end if you want to hear more about that process. While this time we're going to really delve into the artworks and the thematic sections. So our starting point for thinking about the exhibition was really thinking about the ways in which hip hop and hip hop culture really have influenced contemporary art practice. And how we kind of got to that was a realization that most people had in culture of this year, that 2023 is the 50th anniversary of hip hop. If we kind of situate hip hop's early start as Kool Herc's Block Party in the Bronx in 1973. So I'm sure you've seen many articles all over the place, from the New York Times to Rolling Stone to all of these different venues talking about the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And we were kind of preempting that, thinking through that, but really looking at the ways in which over these 50 years, hip hop as a cultural phenomenon, not solely a musical phenomenon, has become truly ensconced in society as one of an incredibly important movement of cultural that has cultural ramifications in everything from music to fashion to contemporary art. So we started really thinking about, how do you do a show about hip hop and contemporary art with it can't be everything. That was a really important starting point. It can't be everything. So we became really interested in the ways in which hip hop influenced artistic production and influenced artists. And that can be everything from artists telling us that hip hop was the soundtrack of their lives in their studio, to artists literally utilizing hip hop figures and language in their works. So that's our kind of starting point. And from that, as a curatorial team, we began thinking about what would be the best organization for an exhibition of that kind of depth and breadth. And over many conversations across a curatorial team and multiple advisory committees, both global and local, we settled in on the we'll call it 6.5 thematic sections that we will walk you through, because we're going to start with a little origins moment. And so the one other point that I wanted to make about this overarching view is it became really important to us as a team, and it became really relevant to us as a team thinking about this, that we are looking at the present. And so if you notice in the title, it's not hip hop across the 20th and 21st centuries. It's hip hop and contemporary art in the 21st century. So most of the work in the show has really been made in the last 23 years. A lot of it has been made for the show or in the last few years. And our look is really how hip hop has influenced contemporary art and culture so much that artists are looking to it and looking back at hip hop across its 50-year history and making things that embody the hip hop culture and spirit. So it's really a show it's grounded in the now, but we have little moments of looking back at hip hop's origin. Should we head into the origin section, Andrea? Do you want to add anything?
I think so. Now let's dive in.
Okay. All right. So when you walk into if you're in the St. Louis area and you can come see the exhibition, would walk into a kind of introductory gallery that we're kind of calling an origin section. And we really did want to kind of create benchmarks and key moments that look back at hip hop's history and how those moments are really relevant to art historical discourse now and to really thinking about how hip hop has become such an influence on contemporary culture. But one of those moments that was so important to us was flagging an incredibly important contemporary artist who's been influential on hip hop culture, and that is Jean-Michel Basquiat. So we really didn't want to start the show without allowing Basquiat a moment because although, he's an artist who tragically passed away in the 1980s, his legacy really deeply lives on in hip hop culture, but also he's truly influential to contemporary artists today. So it's a fun fact is that Basquiat is the most name-dropped visual artist in hip hop lyrics. So he is really influential and kind of a benchmark to hip hop artists of what contemporary art is. And so we were incredibly lucky to be able to show these two very different and very incredible works by Basquiat in this first intro gallery to kind of mark this origins moment. The work on your left, the painting, is really Basquiat's way of working through and thinking about jazz and the legacy of music that leads into hip hop, which, 1983 is still, it's only 10 years old at that point. And Basquiat was really at a part of early hip hop movements, but he was thinking about these longer legacies, the same way he was thinking about legacies and histories of art making from cave paintings and indigenous art all the way into contemporary neo-expressionism. He was also thinking about these legacies of music. And so in this incredible painting, he's paying homage to the jazz musician Charlie Bird Parker. And Charlie Parker is referenced often in Basquiat's works. He becomes a real touch point and kind of a signpost for Basquiat to think about the history of African-American music, the history of jazz, but also really the innovative qualities of abstraction within jazz and within its role within in kind of the foundations of abstraction within African American culture and its influence on visual arts as well. The other work is kind of a key piece. This test press is a key piece in really understanding this overlapping relationship of hip hop and contemporary art. So you can see Basquiat's trademark imagery in the test press. You see the crowns, you see the bones, you see his written language that he uses. And so it's very obviously a design by Basquiat. If you know his style or even comparing it to the painting, you can see the similarities. But what's really important about this work is it's a design for a record cover. And so this was a collaboration that Basquiat did with a vocalist, K-Rob, and with the street artist and hip hop vocalist Rammellzee. And there's another work by Rammellzee in the show because he was an important graffiti artist as well. But they collaborated on the track, and then Basquiat produced it through his record label, Tartown Records, which you can see noted on the record label. So this is a literal collaboration between early hip hop artists, one of which was also a graffiti artist, and a really important contemporary artist, all within the moment of the 1980s as hip hop in New York is really taking off and becoming an incredibly vital and important musical scene. In addition to here, you really see its early influence on so many other elements of work. And that's something that will lead us into the next section is that in the 1970s, hip hop DJ Afrika Bambaataa kind of created a rubric for thinking about hip hop culture. And that rubric was a way to describe how hip hop culture was not just music. It was not singular. It had elements in many, many different areas. So how do you describe all of these different things that are happening at a hip hop concert? You have people rapping, you have DJs who are spinning, you have all of these different elements. And so he created what he called the 5 pillars of hip hop to bring those elements together. And so DJing, breakdancing, graffiti, rapping or emceeing, and then really thinking about the way that hip hop articulates social justice and knowledge. So knowledge became a 5th pillar. And there's many, many more for all of the hip hop historians out there. There's so much more to that. That's the very 101 intro level. But you'll see those 5 pillars of hip hop really play out throughout the sections as well, because hip hop as a cultural phenomenon, you'll keep hearing us say that was incredibly important. And that was also because it wasn't singular in its approach or its medium. So we really did want to think about the ways in which graffiti and breakdancing and all these elements came together and what we're constituting in this exhibition as the influence of hip hop culture on contemporary art. All right, so the first section of the show, a language section. So language, this section really looks at the intrinsic value of language to hip hop culture. The works in this section explore language in many different ways, from looking at language as a visual element, the visual ideas of writing, but also how graffiti really took language and graffiti writing, to create its own kind of visual lexicon. And then you can't forget the lyrics. The lyrics are incredibly important. And so music, embedded lyrics and poetry and writing into, its structure. And we're trying to showcase the ways in which those lyrics and the words of hip hop, rapping and poetry really influenced and imbued significance into many artists' practice. But also language, thinking about language as a system of signs. So part of when we see a word or we see, a stop sign, we know to stop. Language has these kind of articulations of a sign system. And hip hop also created its own kind of lexicon of signs and symbols. And it did this, often intentionally. Oftentimes, hip hop is coming out of communities that are underserved. And there's a lot of elements of thinking about ways in which hip hop artists are articulating their own specific conditions and cultural, moments. And there's a system of signs for recognition of those various cultural moments. And you'll see that in some of these works really in beautiful and interesting ways. So the first piece we're going to talk about briefly is this amazing painting by the Japanese American artist Gajin Fujita. And he is a first generation immigrant. His parents are from Japan, but he was born and raised in Boyle Heights neighborhood in Los Angeles. And Boyle Heights is a predominantly Latinx neighborhood. And he really grew up kind of thinking of himself as straddling so many different cultural spheres. And he was really interested in the ways that LA really is this kind of space in which so many different immigrant cultures and different cultural backgrounds come together. And he was a graffiti writer in his teens. He joined two pretty well-known graffiti crews. And then as he kind of translated his graffiti writing into becoming a fine artist and went to get his BFA and his MFA, he decided to try to create an art practice that continued to think of street art and graffiti as implicit to how he was considering his own practice and Japanese history, Japanese visual culture, and his own relationship to his cultural heritage. So he developed a style in which he took prints from Japan's Edo area, which was about 1603 to 1867. And they're very well-known images. They're samurai, they're geishas, they're kabuki actors. I'm trying to think of all of the different ways, but it was basically a print culture that was it was popular culture. So there were prints that were made for the masses. They were often depicting, entertainment for people, but they're also considered very much a part of the art historical legacy of Japanese art history. So he's interested in this kind of nuance of thinking about popular culture, things we think of as low art, and how that over time often gets uplifted into the realm of high art. And so he decided to pair these images of ukiyo-e prints from the Edo era with his own personal history of being a street artist and a graffiti artist. So he starts out by painting a gold ground on the painting, and then he has all of his friends and graffiti artists tag the painting. So he didn't do all of that graffiti. It's all done by other graffiti artists, and they all sign the back of the paintings, which is the painting is very cool in that way. And then he paints on these kind of contemporary images based on Japanese prints from the 17th and 18th centuries. And then he alters them to include things like different kind of branding, or you see an LA Dodgers logo on the hat. And so he's really thinking about the ways in which, graffiti and street art influence the history of our visual culture and the legacies of art making. The next work I want to touch on is this incredible work by Khalil Robert Irving, who is a St. Louis-based artist who makes these works out of ceramics. So they look almost like cement or various broken objects kind of embedded in concrete, but actually he creates them in the same method that porcelain is. It's a porcelain method and that studios like Meissen or Sèvres, these very famous histories of decorative arts, are made out of. But he creates this kind of juxtaposition of something that looks like the street or looks like almost like garbage. Like you see a kind of Bud Light logo, or you can see chain link fences, these kind of elements of the street embedded within this kind of structure of this deep history of decorative arts that is seen as very expensive and luxury items. But also, if you look very closely into the image, he also embeds news elements, particularly looking at histories of police violence. So if there's images of Jason Stockley, a St. Louis, Missouri police officer who was acquitted in 2017 for the 2011 murder of Anthony Lamar Smith, and along with other scenes of protests against police brutality. So again, trying to draw attention to this tension and the very true, elements of communities needing to think about police brutality. And Khalil doesn't shy away from any of it. And he has a base on the piece that's not shown in this image that has QR codes that will take you to news stories, that take you to histories, and really thinking about the ways in which communities are affected by power and surveillance, but also by digital culture. And finally, we're not there yet. Finally, in language, this work by Alvaro Barrington, we just thought this spoke so completely to our thinking about language as a theme that drew together, as we were talking about these elements of thinking about graffiti, thinking about social justice, of thinking about lyrics and music. So here, Alvaro Barrington is a London-based artist of Grenadian and Haitian descent. And he grew up in a West Indian neighborhood in Brooklyn. And he's very interested in these kind of melting pots of blending of cultures. But he was a huge fan of Tupac Shakur. And here you can see the lyric. There's a poem by Tupac that's sewn into this piece. They can't is Tupac Shakur's. It's from Tupac Shakur's 1993 song, Keep Your Head Up. And the phrase is, they got money for wars, but can't feed the poor. So really drawing out some of these elements of social justice, of thinking about the ways in which, hip hop artists and hip hop intersects with community. But then also what you're seeing on the left is a rose painted onto this kind of box that is out of concrete, that he kind of made a slip out of concrete and painted this rose. And that is reminiscent of Tupac's autobiographical poetry called The Rose That Grew from Concrete, which is about his own experiences and issues dealing with poverty, dealing with police brutality and violence in the Oakland area in the Bay Area of California. So this really kind of brought together the ways in which language and poetics and all of these elements come together in this truly sculptural form, and then using thread, using these kind of elements that are handmade and community-based and tie together groups of people was really important to us to showcase that power of language. Okay, take a breath for a second. We'll go into the next section. So the next section of our exhibition, we are looking at brand. So this section highlights how artists examine icons born from hip hop. And it also looks at the seduction of success and money and how those elements play into how things are represented. In its early years, many hip hop artists became unofficial promoters of major brands. It was one of those elements of hip hop that I think it's probably better known now, but it was incredibly important. Hip hop was part and parcel of the branding of musicians actually becoming affiliated with brands. And often these brands aligned their style and bolstered the public persona of these various artists. Think of Run DMC and Adidas. Today, artists partner directly with brands and companies, and oftentimes artists will create brands themselves. And one of the things we were really looking at is how through these processes, individuals, people, rap stars, contemporary artists, they become brands themselves. So we wanted to really kind of look at this constellation and this kind of multifaceted definition of what brand was. So this is a work by the Brazilian artist who also is based part of the year in Baltimore, Zay Polito. And this is a really fun one because it's really kind of expressing brand as an expressive gesture. So how branding, so you see the figure wearing a hoodie that has FUBU on it, and just the importance of that moment, that brand really means something, and that person wearing that brand means something, and draws you into thinking through those kind of connections. And then Zay Polito really creates, he's a storyteller with his paintings and a cultural observer. And he's really interested in thinking and in some ways providing insight and really thought to contemporary African diasporic life from multiple perspectives, because he's a Afro-Brazilian, so also thinking about African American life, and then thinking about all of these different ways in which African diasporic life shines and exists. And he creates these beautiful narratives and stories through these brightly colored paintings full of symbols. So you see there's a kind of brooch or symbol on the sweatshirt, and that's a Maryland crab with the Maryland flag. So he's drawing attention to the local and to the brand and to the element to kind of create a scene that really demonstrates confidence and self-assurance just through existence and being in the world. This piece, this was one that we, I think, put into the show very early on because it just felt so like it's so articulated, especially this idea of brand. And this is work by Louis Gaspar. And it's part of a series where he took luxury cars, in this case a BMW, and upholstered them with branded upholstery, and in this case, Louis Vuitton. So here we have like a Louis Vuitton upholstered BMW that's facing Uluru, which is it's also known as Ayers Rock. It's a rock formation in Australia. So he creates these incredibly surreal scenes of luxury, of brand, but then like taking you into this location that feels both in and out of time. And Gaspar kind of talks about his work as being an anthropological investigation into aspects of contemporary culture. And for him, in this case, really thinking about that poignancy and potency of brand, of why you would want to represent a brand like Louis Vuitton, and how these brands end up having symbolic values to people just through their associations. So through hip hop culture, for example, Louis Vuitton has become, something you would own or wear specifically to associate with a certain form of culture. So he's interested in investigating the ways that these symbols represent elements and sort of the relationship between those luxury brands, but then also thinking about how that relates to working class people, or how people would want to save up to get the brand as a status symbol. So really thinking about the convergence of these elements of kind of the prosaic and the sublime that brand really holds for a lot of people. And he does this through mixing sort of hip hop iconography, but then also these kind of art historical references of the sublime landscape, of the kind of twilight. So it becomes this really multi-layered read on how these elements and objects affect us in our lives. And the last work I'll show you in the brand section is this amazing portrait of Cardi B by Hassan Ajaj, a Moroccan artist. And Hassan Ajaj has become really well known for creating these portraits. He started taking portraits of his friends and family in Morocco, and he always lines his frames with basically everyday objects, brands of Northern Africa. So it has this element where the canisters themselves, the branded food, immediately draws you into a different world because it has Arabic writing on it, and you kind of trying to put a place on where this is and where you're situated. But then it's a portrait of Cardi B. And Hassan Ajaj really talks about how he's really interested. He takes a lot of images that are portraits of celebrities, but he also does a lot of images of regular people. And he wants to bleed those associations and treat everybody in the same manner. And so for him, it becomes this really important element to think about how we see brand through portraiture, and really consider why we value and see different people as these different kind of brands and sites of celebrity. And Cardi B in and of herself, like as a string through the show, many hip hop stars become kind of elements through the show, in that their name and their brand become a part of the lexicon of hip hop culture, and that recognizable image of an individual who's become a brand.
Hello. Listen, This is such a teaser. This show includes over 90 works. So just having a chance to give you a bite-sized snippet is almost painful for both Hannah and I. So I think you're seeing our excitement. We are exuberant about the show. The works themselves are not even giving it justice. You must see this in person. I have the pleasure of speaking to you now about the next section that you encounter on your journey through the exhibition. And it, in fact, is called Adornment. I'll also mention, it was earlier noted that this is a collaboration between the Baltimore Museum of Art and the St. Louis Art Museum as the co-organizers. So from that, you are going to definitely see this theme of artists that we're mentioning. In fact, 30% of the show includes work from artists that have ties to either St. Louis or Baltimore. Again, come back for part 2 where we can dive into the making and how this all came to be. But that too was very much so influenced by our advisory group and thinking about the importance, especially as it relates to hip hop and hip hop culture of our grassroots communities. With Adornment, this section looks at personal style and how it relates to and is ingrained in hip hop culture. It also explores concepts colloquially known within the hip hop culture, such as bling and swagger. Going beyond the literal depiction of bling as an object, the section dives into the social and political relationships of adornment and what it signifies in public discourse, as artists look at how various ways of adorning oneself pushes against traditional systems of power and decorum. Adornment shows elements of styles such as wigs. Yes, there are wigs in the show, grills, in fact, medallions, but they'll be shown alongside artworks, critically engaging them in a dialogue around these subjects, meaning such as we are unpacking the thought of the policing of Black hair, which we know is very real, race discrimination, race-based hair discrimination. And it features a range of objects designed by, again, wigs by Deion Alexander, paying homage to Little Kim, as well as works by Derek Adams, Anthony Akingbola, who has taken do-rags and stretched them in an amazing way in a work that he calls a painting. It's incredible and a must to see in person. There are works by Deanna Lawson, Hank Willis Thomas, and Miguel Luciano, just to name a few. The first piece that we'll take a deep dive look into with the next slide is, thank you, friend, is by Yvonne Osei, who is a local St. Louis artist now based in Chicago. The work is called Extensions, and it was created in 2018. It's actually a single channel video. The still shot is giving you the essence of what you will experience in this 6-minute video. And it was filmed in Yvonne's home country of Ghana. And Yvonne is capturing a very performative quality of the everyday cultural tradition of hair braiding. So throughout the video, the braids on the sitter's hair will grow longer and longer, and you'll see the camera will pull back to capture the full length of the hair. And in the end, the braids are so long that in fact they are dragging in the street as the woman walks through the city, her hair literally stopping traffic. The title of this work is also a nod to both the length of the sitter's hair, as well as the impact on hair braiding across the Africa diaspora. Braided hair is much more than beauty. It is historically communicated groups of identity, status, as well as geography. When we think of artists like Queen Latifah from the 1990s and the styles in which she wore braids, to current artists like A$AP Rocky and his current hairstyling, braided hair can serve as another political form of self-presentation. In the next slide, we see a work by Derek Adams, who is a Baltimore, Maryland born artist, now based in New York, and it's called Style Variation 34. Created in 2020. This is a massive work. Derek Adams is an artist who's been described as one of the most important artists of our time. In 2014, Adams photographed windows displayed of wig shops and hair boutiques and braiding salons all throughout the neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. To him, this was a true source of inspiration. So he began creating this collection of artworks called Style Variation. So again, this is Style Variation 34, that stands more than 8 feet tall. It is just this geometric shapes and acrylic paint and graphite cover a photograph of a mannequin's head, creating this assortment, as you can see, of a variety of skin tones against a white background. The long plaits of rainbow colored block hair, which recall the LGBTQIA and pride flag, frame the face of the sitter. And each work in this series variation showcases a different hairstyle and makeup palette, pointing to the power of these elements having in shaping one's identity. So further thinking through the history of Black hair in the United States is heavily shadowed in racism, erasure of identity, forced assimilation. But African Americans have used hair and hairstyles as an act of resistance to these forces as well. Thinking about artists like Solange with, Don't Touch My Hair, also brings in the topic of voyeurism. So we too are thinking about this in this particular area. I'll also note that Derek Adams chooses to celebrate Black joy through his artwork as opposed to rehashing trauma. And he even said, as a Black man, I personally don't need to be reminded of trauma and oppression, and I choose to instead highlight Black normalcy. And the last work that we will take a look at in the adornment section is by an American artist. His name is Hank Willis Thomas. And he employs the familiar, the what goes without saying, and draws connections to provoke conversations. So as you can see in this work called Black Power, as well as other works by Willis Thomas, he is dealing with issues of grief and Black on Black violence, as well as the contributions of corporate culture to the crisis of Black male identity. So we're seeing here a sitter who is wearing a gold grill that reads the word Black Power. So thinking about adornment, even in the sense of a protest, is what we have before us. And this work is in conversation with another piece that is not shown here, but it is in fact a grill that is being treated like a relic. Something very important about Hank Willis Thomas is that his work is heavily influenced by a tragic loss. So he talks about using gold in a very cathartic nature after the loss of his young cousin, Songa Willis Thomas, who was murdered by another Black male outside in a Philadelphia nightclub in an incident of violence involving a gold chain. So the artist credits this event as him finding his artistic focus. And I will say that while this show is for sure a celebration of the art form of hip hop, it is also a critique, right? Like we know that gang violence, gun violence, police brutality, the misogyny of women, all of these critical contemporary conversations are very much so entrenched in hip hop culture and are on full display in the exhibition. I'll turn it over to Hannah to tell us more about the next section, Tribute.
I gotta unmute, sorry. The next section is Tribute. So the section on Tribute looks at how tributes and shout outs are fundamental to hip hop culture. Yet we're also really interested in the way that the tribute testifies to hip hop's development as a canon, in which the subject of the tribute becomes widely recognized by a broader public. The idea that you can recognize various hip hop stars or hip hop cultural elements, whether you know the music or not, it becomes part of our shared cultural lexicon. And so this section really, it's the section that has the most representations of hip hop stars, recognizable images of hip hop stars. This is a section that pays tribute in many ways to those who are deceased. We continue to talk about that throughout the show, but as Andrea said, this is also, it's critical and celebratory. Influence doesn't always it's not always a celebration. Sometimes you can be influenced by things in order to try to change things, to move things forward. And so that becomes an element of this section too, is like looking forward and imagining, you know, different ways of being in the world or paying homage to various artists or people who've been lost. This work by Jen Everett is really kind of a tribute to hip hop music and its historical legacy, and how that is also a very personal relationship. The speaker stack really was, you know, proto hip hop element of Lee Scratch Perry, the famous Jamaican dub artist. And then Kool Herc, he was of Jamaican descent. His parents were Jamaican. Kool Herc is one of the early kind of hip hop DJs. He was influenced by Lee Scratch Perry's setup and also trying to mimic that, these kind of walls of speakers. And here Jen is taking everyday kind of household speakers and boom boxes and building this beautiful sculptural element out of it to really reference the amazing innovation that the actual fundamental shift in music that hip hop had, the hip hop caused, you know, kind of play that out through these various speakers, and also then tapes and other kind of little elements that bring a personal touch and create that connection that people have to musical phenomenons, that these are, you know, these are the tapes of that I listen to, or these are reference points for me on a personal level and this cultural level. And as I said, this is a section where you'll see references, homages, tributes. So this very beautiful small monotype by Joyce Scott, Hip Hop Saint Tupac. She did a whole series called Hip Hop Saints, which kind of elevates hip hop stars to this kind of idea of this beautiful portraiture, this intimate portraiture. And again, the fact that you would recognize the image of Tupac and then have a reference point in history showcases that broader canon and the importance to kind of this cultural legacy that we see across the 50 years of hip hop. This Roberto Lugo piece, while the Joyce Scott is smaller than you would probably think from the image on the screen, this is much bigger than you probably think from the image on the screen. As Andrea said, the show is just so different in person. But Roberto Lugo is an amazing Philadelphia-based artist, ceramicist, and social activist, and he utilizes classical pottery. He's classically trained in decorative arts and pottery, but he basically wants to create a new form of classical pottery to reimagine traditional European and Asian ceramics. So what he does is he adds a 21st century sensibility. But what he does is he hand paints the surface using classical decorative motifs, but combines them with elements of his life and of reference points for him, and graffiti and portraiture and all these things. So here you see this as a tribute to the Notorious B.I.G. pictured here within this kind of touch point of various decorative motifs that you would see across the history of decorative arts. This amazing painting was actually made for the show. As Andrea was saying, we worked very hard to include St. Louis and Baltimore-based artists in nearly every section. And we also talked to almost every artist who was alive. That we basically talked to every single artist in the show. And when we were talking to Shaba Self about earlier works that we were really interested in, she was so taken by the show's thematic sections, by what the show was about, that she thought that she would produce something new that spoke to how she felt about hip hop now versus 10 years ago when her older works were made that we were interested in. She really wanted to have her own evolution of her relationship to hip hop represented. And so here she's created this homage, this tribute, not just to Lil' Kim, where you see the poster, which is kind of a direct sign, but also it's to her sister and her own kind of upbringing. And so her sister on the phone with the Lil' Kim poster. So it becomes this kind of tribute, can also be this nostalgia. The reason we have tributes and we remember these things is because they're part of our own upbringing, our own experiences. This is an homage, in a sense, to DJ Screw in Heaven, to the famous Houston DJ who really was an absolute innovator of an entirely new form of sound called Chopped and Screwed, who tragically died of an overdose. And this is painting by a Houston-based artist, really is a tribute to him and his legacy, but does not shy away from really showcasing the issues of addiction and drug use, even in this kind of scene of heaven. So it becomes this, again, kind of critical, but also celebratory look at, you know, celebrating the life, but understanding the problematics behind certain elements. And finally, we haven't showed you fashion yet, so we can't have a hip hop show without fashion. And that was incredibly important. As Andrea mentioned, we're so thrilled to have Dion Alexander's wigs in the show. And fashion was integral. And we have to shout out to our curatorial assistant, Ricky Bird, who did an amazing job with the fashion element. And one of the things that through all of our hours of conversations came out is, you have to have tracksuits in a hip hop show. And then we were like, what's the history of the tracksuit? What's going on with the tracksuit? And we started thinking about, and Ricky really was bringing us these images and talking about this. The tracksuit itself was not a hip hop fashion element. The tracksuit existed as as sportswear. You'd use it for training, or also, we know it from Olympic processions, other things. It has a pre-hip hop history, but it became so embedded in hip hop that designers would start to one up each other in their tracksuit design. So hip hop fashion almost created constant tributes and shout outs to the tracksuit. And so we really kind of wanted to showcase that evolution of the tracksuit and its impact on fashion in this really beautiful array of different forms of tracksuits from such a wide variety of important Black designers.
The next section is a beat, a very intentional shift. What you'll notice right off is in the sections that we've shown you thus far, the walls are Black. In fact, the color is called Black Beauty. And we are thinking about how hip hop happens at night. In the section that we are about to enter, the walls are white. In fact, it's called White Opulence. This section is called Ascension, and we're looking at mourning as well as transcendence. It's a moment in the show for reflection, considering both loss and spirituality, as well as the ways in which individuals and communities come together in the face of loss and hardship. Whenever I get the pleasure of touring folks around, I like to say, this is a space for you to lay your burdens down. Don't leave this section the same way that you entered. It features artists such as John Edmonds, Lauren Halsey, and Texas Isaiah. The first work that we have a chance to see is a glance that confronts you with death. It's by Devin Shimoyama, and the work is called Before the Storm. Actually, ours is called Cloud Break, so forgive that. And we are thinking about the loss of gun violence as these hanging Timberland boots on rhinestones and silk flowers are present. So what you're seeing is a tradition. It may be new to some, but started in the histories of Los Angeles. You would see Converse tennis shoes on telephone poles, symbolizing a life that was lost, oftentimes in that very spot in communities. Sometimes the size of the shoe signifies the person who wore the shoe, but again, it's hanging high, so you must look up to see it. Well, in this case, the confrontation with death is so real, in fact, the shoes are at eye level. But what is most, I don't even have a word for it. What makes you most emotional is to see the bedazzling of the shoe, because what is now happening is honoring the life that once lived. The foot that wore the shoe mattered, and in the way in which the artist has approached the symbolism of thinking about beauty in a true sense of pain and grief is on full display. So as you see the chain hanging with the flowers, it is a true moment of remembrance. The next work that we'll take a look at is also by Lauren Halsey, American-born artist, and it's called Prototype Columns for the Shaw. And it's a memorial and a monument to the late rapper Nipsey Hussle, who died in 2019. You see white columns rise to the ceiling from a square base, recalling the architecture of ancient Greece, Rome, or Egypt. And on the surface, Lauren Halsey is interspersing contemporary figures and imagery among traditional Egyptian motifs. So the winged figures, they share the space with Los Angeles, California street scenes. We see graffiti, lowriders, and even a profile of the city's skyline. It evokes both this hieroglyphic theme, but also this monumental tomb used by ancient Egyptians to commemorate the life and death of their ruler. Halsey columns act as a way to honor the legacy of those lost too soon, such as Nipsey Hussle, who was fatally shot, as again, like I said, in 2019, in front of a local clothing store that he owned. This has scarred the South Los Angeles neighborhood to its core as he devoted his adult life to championing the Crenshaw neighborhood. And next, we will take a look at our very own Damon Davis. He is St. Louis based, but East St. Louis, Illinois born artist. And this work is called Cracks, also known as Ego, created in 2002, again, for the show. Damon was inspired to think about his practice in a much different way after the loss of his mother. So if you're familiar with Damon's work, you know that typically he works in a bust, but the bust is cut in the center and you see the jewels on the inside. Well, in this case, with this concrete and homegrown crystals, he is giving us jewels on the outside as a real form of protection. Now, here's what's so spectacular about the work. They're homegrown crystals, so it is continuing to grow. So these crystals shimmer and form as this protective layer. And because it is continuing to morph, it has changed so much even since we first sourced the work. So what you're seeing here is what it originally looked like. And when you come and see it in St. Louis, you will notice the difference. It is of Damon's likeness. He saw it recently and said, I can hardly recognize myself. This work has been quite powerful, and Damon talks about the ascension and transcendence that is happening here, and even describes you come from poverty to put things on and to prove you are not poor. So this idea of having the crystals on the outside as this protective layer, if you will, is really on full display here. There's some other hidden moments that I'll encourage you to come and look at and see in person. But again, this work is something that we're extremely proud of to have in the show. And the last work that we will take a look at in the Ascension section is by an artist whose name is Texas Isaiah. It's called Texas Isaiah and Miss Boogie, Pilato, Chapter 2. Miss Boogie, an Afro-Latino transgender rapper, proudly stands by an open gate, as you see in these denim cutoffs. Palito means naked or peeled in Spanish. So the image bears witness to Miss Boogie's during the conception of her debut album, The Breakdown, which celebrates the transformative and transcending experience of the evolution of her personhood. And then at the bottom, Texas Isaiah describes, while the works are in duality, very much so a separation. So the altar that we see below, they describe as a lost childhood. So you are confronted with images that are lying on an altar, devotional candles, photographs taken of the artists themselves, a camera that belonged to their mother, pairs of Nikes, and offerings from St. Louis-based artists are also included here. It's just a small glimpse of the practice that really centers and grounds Texas Isaiah's life and career. And both of the works explore how Texas Isaiah has extended the notion of worship and prayer and remembrance, and the very important homage that's being paid not only to the land, but also fellow creatives. The last section that you experience as a visitor is called Pose. And in this section, we are thinking about how posing happens, how hip hop shows up in the body, self-presentation, being seen, but also being surveilled. We are looking at posing as a sense of control of one's image, but also how it can be voyeuristic and exploitative. Trying to collapse binaries across the show, this section really looks at a very complicated nature of representations of self-identity in hip hop culture, and includes artists such as Caitlin Cherry, Amani Lewis, Nina Chanel Abney, and Jonathan Lyndon Chase. We start with Amani Lewis, a Baltimore artist, in this work called Swamp Boy, created in 2019, which is acrylic and oil pastel with glitter and embroidery. This is paying homage to a West Baltimore artist whose name is Butch Dawson, who is grasping the microphone. So we see a pillar of hip hop on full display with MCing, and the camera flashes the screen. So this is in fact a performance. But Amani Lewis has built this collage from digitally edited images that really blurs and manipulates the photograph in such a way that you can almost not recognize what's happening, and then finishes it with painted details. So the live performance photography that is a source of material for the work gives this collage a real sense of immediacy, and it really takes you into the club. The next work by Jonathan Lyndon Chase, born Philadelphia artist, is called Sunday Morning Music Video. It was created in 2020, and he's used spray paint and acrylic and glitter, marker even. There's collage happening here at the bottom left-hand side. When asked, as Hannah mentioned, with us having the pleasure of speaking to as many artists as possible, when we asked what was missing from hip hop, Jonathan offered what was missing was the Black queer male experience. So in this beautiful, vibrant painting, Jonathan is depicting Black queer life and community, creating space for inclusivity within hip hop culture. Oh, I almost forgot about this special moment by another Baltimore artist, Monica Ikegwu. If you've seen the marketing for the show, then you're familiar with the image on the left, but now you know it's a diptych. So the work is called Open Closed, and it's a showstopper. It's one of the last images you'll see, really as a true salute to hip hop's future, as many have described. It very much so as being forward thinking and rap belonging, the future of rap belonging to females. And in this work, we see on full display posing and how hip hop can show up in the body, both in an open and closed posture. I have had people say to me, is that even a painting? And incredibly, it is. It almost looks 3D. It literally jumps off the canvas, especially with the Black background. It is, in fact, spectacular. And it is of the artist likeness. She's just that beautiful in person, and she's a contemporary artist whom I'm sure we will see more of in the future. The last image that I will talk to you about is truly homegrown, and it's called A Great Day in St. Louis by our very own Adrian Octavius Walker. We end the show very much where we begin. We didn't show the first image that you'll see, but it is called A Great Day in Hip Hop, and it was created by legendary artist Gordon Parks, a photograph taken in 1998 of 177 rappers standing on the stoop of a brownstone in Harlem, itself referencing the 1958 photograph, A Great Day in Harlem by Art Kane. These works in conversation with one another now with this 2022 version, thinking about our local community is a real treat. And I'll even further make the connection that Hannah was with jazz and hip hop, as A Great Day in Harlem is a nod to jazz artists. So one big conversation happening here. A Great Day in St. Louis is taken in a very familiar location. If you're from St. Louis, you may notice that this is in Forest Park. In fact, right outside of the St. Louis Art Museum. You can think of this almost as a remix. And when asked, I asked Adrian, well, why did you choose the location? He said, I wanted a place that everyone would be familiar with and everyone would know how to get there. And they did just that. I have the pleasure of observing this photo, and in real time. It was a Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, folks just began to gather. It was such a sense of community. Many of them knew one another, but hadn't had a chance to all be together, right? They'd seen each other on stage, but this was a very, very special moment. I also asked Adrian why he made the choice to present this work in color, as it too was shot in black and white. And he said the choice to make it in color was to show a brighter day. If you know St. Louis, then you know the woes that exist in our community. And Adrian said, there is a brighter tomorrow. It is, in fact, possible. And it may take our hip hop community, our artists, our creatives in this amazing ecosystem to get us there. What you'll also notice is that the artists are facing the museum. So yet another opportunity to look in the eye of the gatekeeper and say, we are art. We get to decide. And in this moment, it is just such a special opportunity for us at the St. Louis Art Museum to have our local hip hop community a part of this presentation, a part of this story, and a part of the history of hip hop, not only globally, internationally, but also in our very own community. We hope as you experience the culture exhibition in person, you will see not only the works that Hannah and I have spoken with you about today, but the full breadth and depth of how art showcases the way that hip hop as a cultural phenomenon has truly transformed the world in which we live. I'll turn it back over to our friend Jessica to field any questions that we may have. Thank you all for listening. This has been our pleasure.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. That was phenomenal. And I appreciate both of you so very much. But your enthusiasm, you covered so much in such a short amount of time. So I do want to encourage people, if you have questions, please type those into the Q&A box. We only have a few minutes left, but we'll answer those as they come in. I don't think there are any right now. So while we are waiting, I just thought I'd pose a question to Hannah and Andrea. As you were working in this group of curators creating this, were there any themes or topics that you originally really wanted to include in the show, but that had to be cut just for space, or perhaps got enveloped into another theme? Was there anything that you would love to have seen if there had been more space?
That's a tough one. Andrea, I can't remember any the themes kind of all just kind of solidified. So at one point we had like bling and adornment as separate themes and they kind of became one. But there were so many artworks. We could have done this show like 4 times over with the number of artwork. There were heartbreaking ones. There were ones that we couldn't get because we couldn't get the loans, or that they would have needed to be shipped from, places in very, very far away and we couldn't do it. And that for me was the hardest part, is we wanted to there were so many more artworks.
Our cutting room floor wish list is another show within itself. And I'll also say that while we've gone through sections, this is really just the tip of the iceberg, right? As it relates to these critical contemporary conversations, each section could be a show within itself. That has been made very clear to us. I guess to more directly answer your question, there was a section titled Stage, that while we did not have a chance to think of it maybe in the way that we originally were thinking of it, if you will, in our presentation here in St. Louis, a part of Stage is a work by Gary Simmons called The Garage Lab. That is a performance sculpture that will be activated, as you very well know, Jessica, throughout the run of the exhibition. So it, in fact, is thinking about the art of practice, right? As it is a modern day garage lab, and we're seeing performances happen as they would in practice. So that is a stage, if you will, in a way that we were still able to keep the true framework of the show, but making it even more accessible because it's a part of the exhibition, but a part of an experience that anyone can have, even if they aren't purchasing a ticket to see the show, as it lives in our sculpture hall here at the St. Louis Art Museum.
And I might take that moment, since we only have maybe a couple minutes left. Do you mind talking about that a little bit? I know it'll come up probably in the next Art Speaks, but talk about those objects that are not within the main part of the exhibition.
Yeah, I can plug that really quick. One of the things, and we'll talk about a lot more of the framework behind this in the next Art Speaks, but we really wanted to have elements of the show throughout the building and have elements that were free and that you could keep coming back to visit, even if you didn't buy a ticket to the show. And one of the things Andrea mentioned, Yvonne Osei's amazing video, but there's a lot more video in the show, and we pulled out really incredible videos. So there are 3 black box video spaces accessible to everybody who walks into the museum by artists Stan Douglas, Khalil Joseph, and by Arthur Jaffa and Alyssa Blount Moorhead in a collective that was a Jay-Z music video. So there's so much music as well that we didn't fully mention, and we'll also talk about this next one. So a lot of reasons to come back. There is a soundscape in the exhibition that was also composed specifically for. So it's not a silent, these slides make it so static, but it's not a silent show. It's a really robust show with many elements.
Jessica,
And
if it's, go ahead.
No, and there's the shoes. Do you want to mention the Aaron Fowler?
But not to be missed, Aaron Fowler shoes that are a tribute to Air Force Ones. It's a massive sculpture made from repurposed car parts. Even the magnitude and the size is to show the power and influence that the shoe has had in hip hop culture. You'll notice that the shoe is elevated. He is reminding us of a pillar, breakdancing. So he is wanting you to imagine that the shoes themselves are dancing. If it was up to Aaron, they would be. It's a spectacular, spectacular piece to just see in real life. It is so large, in fact, that the shoelaces are made from seat belts. A cathartic moment for Aaron is happening here too, as with this work, he is thinking about a cousin that he lost in a car accident. So for him, working and using car parts is extremely therapeutic. Definitely something not to be missed. There's so much. There's just so much. But if you don't mind, we do have questions. I'm going to just maybe take one question, and Hannah, I'm going to throw it to you. We can maybe entice a little bit more of bringing folks back as we think about, unpacking some of the curatorial process, right? And demystifying it, if you will. So the question is, what was the most surprising aspect of this project as it unfolded? I know, right?
That's so hard. I mean, honestly, the whole thing to me was surprising and felt so right at the same time. It was but as a, curator of many years at this point, this was the most unique project I've ever worked on. And I think for me, one of the most surprising things was just how far all the conversations, how important and grounding just curating a show through conversations was. We weren't in libraries reading books. I mean, we did that some, but that was like your own time. Like we were on Zoom for days a week, meeting with artists, talking to community members, talking to each other, and how just talking became the kind of rubric and framework for the show, and how beautiful and collaborative that was as a process. As a, academic curator, that was surprising, but also it will change the way I work from now on.
Yeah. We'll go. I could sing a whole love song to Hannah and the process of what it has meant as an audience development. So I'm all about the people and the voices and community. So bringing our worlds together has been one of the most beautiful journeys I've had in my professional career, I must say. And I think for me, a surprising moment has been, maybe the non-traditional hip hop heads, if you will, or the non-traditional folks that didn't think, or that would tell us hip hop is not my thing. I'm not into that hip hop. And we are serious when we say that this has happened from the 15 and 16-year-olds, all the way up, right? But how transformative they are after walking through the exhibition and have, found themselves saying, wow, I saw myself there, right? I felt connected, right? I feel like I am a part of this history, a part of this story, even if I didn't know that I was. So those surprise, and they happen every day. It is such a pleasure to see how audience is responding to the show, and will continue to. The show is up through January the 1st, plenty of time to get here. And goes on an international tour even after this. So an easy stop to see it would be St. Louis. Jessica, we have gone over time. We talked way too much.
Listen, you covered quite a bit, so
The show
totally
excites
fine.
us.
It is. It's so exciting, and I'm happy to say that to the audience here that you will be back. You both will be back. And this upcoming one that we've mentioned several times. So that will be on Thursday, November 9th at 12:30 in the afternoon, Central Time. And essentially, of course, it'll be talking more about the process of how this exhibition came to be, the advisory group. It's kind of, it is definitely a non-traditional way, I would say, of creating an exhibition. So it's all very exciting. So I invite people to come back to join the three of us for that again. And thank you all. I hope everyone makes it to the exhibition and have a great day.
See you soon. Bye.